Hi, welcome to another edition of This Issue. My guests this time are Jake Diliberto, and Nathan Havey from Rethink Afghanistan. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thanks.
It's good to be here.
All right, it's great to have you. Tell me, first of all, a little bit about yourselves, and then we'll talk about the organization, Rethink Afghanistan. Jake, you want to start?
Sure. I'm Jake Diliberto. Diliberto, that's correct, yeah. I'm a veteran that served in the Operation Enduring Freedom in 2001 and Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2003.
Enduring Freedom, that was Afghanistan?
That was Afghanistan.
Okay.
And Iraqi Freedom, of course, Iraq. In 2004, I got out on an honorable discharge, and I started my academic career at Illinois State University.
So you went in the military right out of high school?
That's right. Yeah, 10 days after graduation, I left for Marine Corps boot camp.
Did you do that because patriotic reasons or jobs, economy? What was the reason you joined the military?
Well, one of the things is my family has a long time history in the military. I have a great-grandfather that served in World War I. I'm sorry, that'd be great-grandfather. I have a grandfather. Both grandfathers and my grandmother served in World War II. My brother was a Citadel student, ROTC scholarship. My uncle's a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. So it was a family tradition, patriotic duty, wanted to serve the country, and to this day, I still love America. So at that time, we were in a peace operation, but I wanted to be a part of the overall help for America.
So then after you got out of the military, you were going to college?
I was at Illinois State University, and while I was there, I was also working inside of churches, or specifically a church, a large evangelical megachurch, and we're working with humanitarian efforts, mission trips, things like that to Mexico. And so I had a humanitarian effort the same way that I wanted to do while I was in the military.
You come from kind of a Christian fundamentalist background. Is that accurate to say?
Certainly conservative. There's something about the Christian tradition that has always been a part of my family, where we wanted to care for those that don't have, those who are poor, those that are oppressed, to call out and try to be involved in people and help their lives.
Yeah. So what was it then that got you where you are today from this experience?
I was in classes in my undergraduate experience, and after I got out of the Marines, I was avidly for the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. I defended them. I defended the Bush Doctrine.
This is after you got out of the military.
That's right. I was programmed. I was hardcore, ready to go back again. One of my professors really took me under the wing. Actually, two: Dr. Amataru Walrab and Dr. Jamal Nassar. And one was an Egyptian and one was Palestinian. They took me under their wing and they asked me to really continue this debate with them. And Dr. Nassar asked me to lead a group of students to Palestine for the summer. And I did. And we went and we lived with fundamentalist Muslims in their homes in West Bank and in Nazareth. And we taught English to children, to Jewish, Muslim, and Christian children. And at the end of that summer, I had a button that clicked inside that said, aha, this is really true humanitarian efforts. This is how things get done. This is how the world changes. And when I came back, I went to my church and said, we need to rethink our positions on Islam and on homosexuality. Not saying that it's good or it's bad, but we just need to learn how to love these people again. That got me fired, and that ended up taking me down a series of roads, and one of those roads was taking me to Fuller Theological Seminary, where I was studying theology and ethics and international relations. And long story short is that we started Rethink Afghanistan and sometime early this year.
Wow. Okay. Well, before we get more into Rethink Afghanistan, Nathan, tell us about yourself.
Sure. I hail from Denver, Colorado. Grew up there. I went to school in Greeley, Colorado, a little cow town about an hour north of Denver. It's known for its aroma.
And it has nuclear weapons deployed nearby.
It does,
out in the countryside.
in silos. There's a friend of mine who deployed to Afghanistan. Actually, it's kind of or no, he deployed to Iraq. And he said that there's a real awesome feeling sitting with your back to one of those silos that may well be a sort of launching tube for a nuclear weapon and looking out over the mountains to the west. So it's a real eerie place, Greeley. It was a great place to go to school. I studied acting and political science. And then after graduating there, I worked as a waiter in a restaurant for a little while and did some politics in Denver, and then went out to Washington, D.C. to work for Congresswoman Diana DeGette from Denver, Colorado.
As an aide? Or?
Yeah, I was her director of e-communications, so really kind of helping to sort of push the envelope on new media work and new media strategy in the House. And I'd worked a couple of other places in D.C. as well. And then after having left Congress, I actually went to California, to Los Angeles, with my girlfriend who also worked in Congress. We met there. She got into law school at UCLA, and I went to LA and got a job working for Brave New Films in their political department. And Brave New Films is the producer of a film called Rethink Afghanistan, and that's sort of how I got involved with it.
So tell us about this film, Rethink Afghanistan. What's the purpose of it, and what's it about?
Sure. So Rethink Afghanistan, it's kind of interesting in a couple of different levels. What it's about is Afghanistan. It's a real serious look at the history of Afghanistan, the political situation now, the military situation now, the situation of women. It's a very thorough examination of what's going on, and it is obviously Rethink Afghanistan, sort of predicated on the premise that there's a lot of assumptions that are being made about Afghanistan that are not, they're false assumptions. So the film it's sort of a new form of documentary. It's very interesting. Robert Greenwald, who's the director of Brave New Films, sort of had been making big feature-length documentary films, but it takes about 6 months to make those. So you can't really respond to what's happening in the news. So he sort of moved away from that into short-format video distributed on the internet, which was very successful. But again, there you can only get so deep in a 5 or 10 minute piece. So this is sort of a hybrid of the two, which is releasing a full-length documentary film in segments as they're completed. It's what we call a real-time documentary. So we started this work about the beginning of the year, and I have now, I believe, released 6 chapters. So 6 chapters have been released, and then this will eventually be combined into a feature-length film, but it's all available at rethinkafghanistan.com.
And how did you get involved with this Rethink Afghanistan effort?
Well, I was, since my studies had taken me on the road of theology, ethics, international relations, looking at religion and all the forms of the foreign relations and U.S. foreign policy, I was at a conference and I wrote a paper on ethics and military recruiting. And that conference generated a buzz. I got a radio show, and then some people said, hey, I think that you need to look into connecting with the people at Brave New. And me and Nathan got together and we exchanged a phone call, and consequently Nathan actually went to college with my cousins in Greeley. Yeah. So there's a long time connection, and what happened, we just clicked and we saw each other on the same page, that essentially what I was trying to do throughout my own individual work, throughout my studies, was not alienate anybody on the left or the right, not use partisanship or rhetoric to gather a base and then push people to promote my message. I wanted to get people thinking holistically about issues.
And because you come from a military and a Christian, even a conservative Christian background, you have a sort of a sensibility where you want to reach out to both sides then.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you guys are currently on a tour of Maine. You're going to Brunswick, Waterville, Belfast, Portland, Bangor, all over the state, showing this film and then talking to people about the situation in Afghanistan.
That's right.
Now, you guys also were part of a recent lobbying last May to Washington, D.C. Tell me about that.
That's actually how we met. As part of my duties for Brave New Foundation and Films, we had the idea that it would be sort of a good experiment and a good thing to try and raise the profile of the film and specifically the questions within the film on Capitol Hill. So we thought no better way to do that than to see if we could find 11 veterans of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and take them with us. So I was tasked with finding them, and we actually went out to Washington with 11 vets. We had 63 meetings over the course of 4 days, and we were there, I think, Monday through a Thursday. Thursday was May 14th, the first time the House voted on the war supplemental, and that day of the vote, 60 members voted no. And we can't take credit for all 60 or even most of them, but we definitely think that we sort of started a trend in Washington of really asking a lot of these questions. And we learned that, especially among Democrats in the House, these questions are really out there. There's nobody that's real comfortable with what's happening in Afghanistan right now. So it's nearing what we think is a tipping point where we can really put some meaningful pressure to get out of there.
In fact, just in recent days, the Washington Post reported on a ABC News Washington Post poll that said 51% of the Americans are now against Afghanistan war, and that was up 6% in the past month. So
That's right.
Very quickly something is happening. But prior to the show, you were telling me a very moving story. You were telling me about before this trip to DC happened, as you were preparing for it, you were talking to a lot of these Afghanistan veterans. Tell us that.
It was a job at first, and now this movement is a passion for me. And what sort of the tipping point of that was in preparation to go to Washington. I spent about 30 minutes on the phone with each of the veterans that we were going to take, and I came to understand two really important things. Well, the first was with security in Afghanistan. We talk about how we need to be there to sort of secure the country for people, keep them safe. In my head, I had never really thought about it, but I assumed that was something like what happens at the airport, where you drive through with your car, and there's some people with big guns that are standing there, and should anything happen, they're ready, and that's what security is. But through talking to the Marine grunts that were on the ground doing door-to-door operations in Afghanistan and in Iraq, what military security is kicking in doors at 2 o'clock in the morning and taking people out of their beds and cuffing them and hooding them if you need to and putting them out on a street corner so that you can search the house and make sure there's no weapons or bad guys. And it sort of got me thinking about what we would do if there was an occupying power that was securing us by kicking in our doors with our families at 2 o'clock in the morning. And it's like, that's not going to work. That's totally silly. So that was one of the assumptions that I thought was just something that most people don't understand, is what military operations actually look like. I haven't served and I don't know. So for me, hearing this from people that had been over there was totally novel and really, really got me thinking. The other thing that was really interesting was all these people that are signing up for the United States military do so with the implicit promise that they will not be sent into harm's way unless it is absolutely essential for the safety of the United States. And you can disagree about whether right after 9/11 we needed to go in militarily, but today, nobody says that we need to necessarily be there right now for the immediate security of the United States. Everybody gives the reasons about securing the population of Afghanistan and that sort of thing, but it's like there's this default response in Congress now to keep veterans there, or excuse me, to keep soldiers there in harm's way. Without a plan, without an exit strategy? Shouldn't it be that we only send our brave men and women in uniform into harm's way when there is definitely a plan, there's definitely a strategy? But now it's, well, we'll keep them there until we have a plan or a strategy and just hope the right thing happens. So those two things were what I learned.
Jake, when you went to last May for this round of Congress with these other veterans, what was your message?
Our message was not to polarize the left and the right. Our message was to get them to think about foreign policy coherently and look at the holistic issues that we deal with in Afghanistan.
And what was your own experience in Afghanistan? Did that in any way inform you about the situation today?
Looking at Iraq and Afghanistan, both are very similar in the way that we are putting out U.S. troops. The overall strategy to win the hearts and the minds, first people have to know that the U.S. Manual for Counterinsurgency demands for there to be NGOs and non-state actors as a part of the winning of the hearts and minds. Hospital building, road building, schools, all that sort of things. But in Afghanistan and Iraq, both alike, that is not being done. That is not the situation on the ground. The situation on the ground is actually more and more troops going in, and those troops are actually protecting civilian contractors. They're protecting corporations that are moving in, building bases and things like that. The overall mission of winning the hearts and the minds of the people is not the major thing that's taking place.
Now today in Afghanistan, and I think in Iraq too, correct me if I'm wrong, there are more quote-unquote civilian contractors there than actual U.S. military
That's right.
troops.
There's something like 250,000 civilian contractors deployed worldwide between Iraq and Afghanistan, and the small footprint in Africa.
And what does that mean to our foreign policy when we have so many civilian contractors? Is it like a sort of corporate military itself?
I think the real main issue is that it's sort of this new legal framework. So they're essentially operating under impunity right now. There's no established framework for these people to have any sort of law that is binding their actions. So as these contractors are over there and they're working, there's no accountability. So if the United States is over there to spread freedom and democracy, this is exactly it's like using a completely unfree and completely undemocratic, unaccountable tool.
That's right.
To do that, and it's very hypocritical.
In the 14th century, I think 14th century, writer Machiavelli and the Prince talked about this. People knew this has been a history. This has been something that's happened in war throughout the history. That contractors and outside national interests have been a part of it. People have been profiting from things for a long time, and it's very problematic. But secondly, that the State Department is the one that's hiring civilian contractors. It's not the Department of Defense. So when we say, well, support our troops, we want to increase democracy in the world, there are certain checks and balances that are set up in the system so that the Department of Defense has a checks and balances set up. But if the State Department is hiring contractors to go in there, those checks and balances are no longer there because the State Department answers to the executive branch alone.
Anything else on this you might want to say?
Other than the fact that that civilian contractors are getting paid exorbitant amount of money, and our troops are treated like garbage. Our troops are treated like garbage once they're in, and they're treated like garbage when they get out. And there's a growing trend within the troops of saying, well, I'm going Blackwater, or I'm going triple canopy. And I've got friends that work for both of them, and it's problematic for U.S. foreign policy.
So that means when they get out of the military, when they serve their term, they essentially then go join the corporation, and they make a lot more money.
That's right.
And they have no restrictions.
That's right. And meantime, there's long-term social costs to this. Costs of PTSD, the conditioning that war is acceptable, the conditioning that I mean, as a Christian, I believe that war is a last resort thing that's used only in the means of preservation of life for a long time. That's just war theory. And when war becomes profitable, war no longer becomes something that can be governed because the capitalistic market takes over. And that's a problem for us as Americans.
Yeah, there's another very interesting sort of anecdote with this, and that is I believe the most highly decorated Marine in U.S. history is a guy named General Smedley Butler, is that right?
That's right.
And he is someone that I'm told Marines are taught to really worship in boot camp and in a lot of their training. Smedley Butler is this ideal. And interestingly, when Smedley Butler left the Marine Corps, he wrote a book called War is a Racket, which really highlights the way that war is meant to and very good at making certain people very, very rich. And contractors, especially the folks at the higher ups in these firms, Blackwater and the rest, are just making amazing, amazing sums of money and tanking the American economy as a corollary.
I've read that book, and Smedley Butler talks about how the Marines were a protection for the corporate profit makers during his time, and that were occupying Latin America, and
that's still taking place today.
Yeah. So basically, are you saying then that America is that our economy and that our country is addicted to war? Is that essentially the point?
I think that war is something that that is shaping our culture. That we're in such need for meaning. We have such need for purpose, and that war has shaped us since the fall of World War, since the end of World War II. Steadily, we've gotten ourselves into wars after war after war. We've stretched ourselves so far, and we haven't recognized. We've had the ability to start wars. We haven't had the ability to end them. And we should support our troops. We should support our government by saying, let us not get involved with one more military action unless we have a long-term goal that can actually be achievable.
Right. I think that we are addicted to war, and the thing that is really becoming obvious to me is sort of the network of things that keep the system in place. So on the one hand, you have all of the different places, like here in Maine, you've got the Bath Steel Works that is making these big,
Bath Iron Works.
Excuse me, the Bath Iron Works making these big destroyers. And so as soon as somebody says, you know, maybe we should cut back on building these tools for war, then there's a bunch of different members of Congress across the country who are otherwise, Shelley Pingree, very opposed to war. But then when you talk about the job loss that would result from cutting back on one more destroyer, cutting back on these planes and all these different things, there's this sort of odd thing where to defend their constituents and their livelihoods, members of Congress have to support the military-industrial complex. And so it's a very twisted web that is sort of locking us into this system that we're in right now, and sort of picking that apart piece by piece is what I'd love to focus on.
Today, America's #1 industrial export product is weapons. And I'd like to ask the question, two questions. Number one, what does it say about the soul of America when we have to have endless war in order to provide jobs for our families? And secondly, when weapons are your #1 industrial export product, what is your global marketing strategy for that product line?
Sure, I'll pick this up. Well, Thomas Paine said that the moral voice of the country is the winter soldier, the one who is stand up and talk against certain situations that are causing moral dilemmas. And as a Christian ethicist, I can say that if our #1 sole export, our
Industrial export.
Our industrial export is weapons and bullets and this sort of things, then perhaps we have lost our moral voice. If our #1 export was education and love and hospitality and things like this, then perhaps that would be something of a moral virtue.
But someone just listening just had this thought to what you just said. If our #1 export was love and
hospitality and
education,
education,
they're saying, okay, come on, Jake, join the real world. We got to go out and we've got to kill these bad guys. We got to kill these fundamentalists, because if we don't kill them, they're going to come here to America and put you and your mother in a burqa. You know. So what's your response to that?
That sentiment started as a result of 9/11. Before 9/11, that sort of concept wasn't really that pervasive, because
well, it was before that. It was in my time. It was, we got to kill the commies because otherwise they're going to come here and turn us all into reds.
Let's talk about Afghanistan and dealing with this then real quick. The threat of the world, the war on terror, is something that was started by a 5,000 to 7,000 operative force known as Al-Qaeda. It is a worldwide criminal conspiracy that needs to be dealt with. I'm a realist about that. I'm a Reinhold Niebuhr realist. I get that, and I am all about that. But you deal with that appropriately. You dispatch a worldwide effort of intelligence and police actions to find out that threat, to root it out, to imprison it, and at worst case scenario, kill it if possible, if it has to be. But you imprison it, you rehabilitate it, and you use it as an ally to the rest of the world. One of the best allies the United States has to the rest of the world is its completely moderate Islamic community. The State Department wisely brought Iraqi Shia and Sunni clerics to the United States after the end of, or during the Iraqi freedom efforts, so they could see, the Arabs could see what moderate Muslims look like in the United States. And as a Christian, I consider that good evangelism. That's good, heartfelt efforts that you can reach across and bring people in. But secondly on this, that if we allow continued forces to escalate in that region, we only give them excuses for extremism. And that's what we need to fight against.
Nathan,
this is the
you want to
cosmic
comment
war.
on this, General?
I'm going to take this from just as you said, a political messaging and sort of business model standpoint. And this is not, well, okay, so anyway. To answer your question directly, if our chief export is weapons, then the business model for that obviously would be to sow violent conflict everywhere that we can. I don't think that anybody really honest to God is trying to do that. However, I think that whenever there is the threat of such conflict, like take Israel and Palestine as a case in point, you've got people that are more than willing to say, you need to defend yourself. Let me sell you all these guns and everything. And then it's sort of the problem between the United States and Britain, where we're killing 14,000 or whatever of our own people in random gun violence. And in Britain, it's much, much less, is because there just aren't the weapons there. So if you put a whole bunch of weapons into these otherwise very volatile situations, then that turns into wars.
I'm talking to Jake Diliberto. Why can't I say your name?
Diliberto.
Diliberto. It just won't roll off the tongue. Jake Diliberto and Nathan Havey, who are touring the state right now, talking about rethinking Afghanistan. We only have about 4 minutes left. Let's move to solutions.
Sure.
What do we do? How do we respond? What is the message that we should all be delivering to the politicians? Our two representatives, Shelley Pingree and Mike Mishu, voted against the last war appropriation funding for Afghanistan, but our two senators, Snowe and Collins, are still voting in favor of it. In fact, they won't even meet with representatives of the peace movement right now in the state to talk about this. So what is the message? What do you want the viewers to carry home from this?
The big thing with this is we have to expand the number of people who are willing to take this movement on. So one of the big things with that is there are the traditional peace groups, and they serve a very vital role. But if it stays in the traditional peace groups, it's never going to be effective. Jake is a case in point example of how the religious community can be mobilized in this fight. And I would argue that labor is another great ally. There's just a bunch of different groups that, when brought together, Senators Snowe and Collins would have no choice but to meet with you and take you very seriously, because if they make you all angry, they're not going to be senators very much longer. So it's about finding those allies and figuring out what you can agree on, and mobilizing all of your support, and that is the way that we're going to win this. And not just in Maine, but people across the country have to do that. And it's not just about ending Afghanistan, it's about ending America's propensity for war.
And Jake, how do we talk to the average people about this situation?
The main effort needs to be not alienating the left and the right. The language has to be done inclusively. It's not any less moral to say the war is bad because we can't afford it than it is to say war is bad. You need to create a space so that people can come and learn, because there's a lot of people on the fence. That's starting pragmatically, number one. But then also number two is allowing an intellectual discussion to happen. Like, I'm under the impression that states, the United States as well as Saudi Arabia or anybody else, will operate out of their own self-interest. And so perhaps a worldwide self-interest would be something like preserving each other's economy, preserving the environment, preserving life in general, human rights. Those are worldwide efforts that people will generally agree on.
We do have a crisis today. It's called climate change. Yeah. And that shouldn't we be using our monies, instead of endless war in Iraq and Afghanistan, shouldn't we be using our monies to build rail and solar and wind to deal with climate change?
And if I may take it this way, Jake, I'm sure you'll agree, it's essentially beating our swords into plowshares, where we can retool places like the Bath Iron Works from making big destroyers to making wind turbines.
Yeah.
Wisely, Jesus said for a long time that continued eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth mentality will only make people blind. But rather, we can create a different way.
Yeah. So each of you, 30-second wrap up.
Great. Well, first of all, I just want to thank you for having us here, because it's in helping other people to start to think about things like this, whether we're right or we're wrong. These are important questions that everybody needs to consider. So Rethink Afghanistan is very appropriately titled because it's about rethinking.
And we're going to put the website on the screen, so people go there, they'll be able to see the videos?
That's right. www.rethinkafghanistan.com. It's all there and it's free to use. Please spread it around.
For those that are on the fence, please visit rethinkafghanistan.com. It has a series of videos that you can watch that it raises critical questions about the cost of war, security, real security, and then the problems of human rights and women affairs. Please go to Rethink Afghanistan.
Well, this show will play in 8 stations across Maine, so the message will reach a lot of people. Thank you guys for coming on the show.
Thanks very much.
Great job. And thank you for watching another edition of This Issue. Until next time, good luck to you all, and please get organized.